introduction. I like to start with the expectations, not to manage the expectations, but just to talk about them. So let's talk about you first. You have a passion or not in something. It could be software development, that could be product development, product management. It could be user experience. It could be customer success. It could be documentation. It could be almost anything. The important thing is you care about being agile. It is important for you. Once you have learned about agile, you don't want to go back. And it's one of the major criterion in your career. So also assuming that you're ready for your next career move. Just a little disclaimer, I'm not promoting anything related to Great Resignation. I'm not encouraging you to change jobs or nothing. It's just that this is the context. I try to share my stuff with you today. So what I will be talking about is what questions to ask and what clues to look for. And of course, how to interpret what you hear as an answer to your questions. Then, of course, who is speaking here? So my name is Ender. Very nice to meet all of you. The name is similar to, if you know Orson Scott Card's novels, Ender's Game. But no, I wasn't named after the character in the novel. But my son is, actually. So my current job is growing people and teams, and I love it. But I did have different jobs in the past. I have been a computer scientist, researcher, and then I moved on to the industry or the real world. I worked as a software engineer and a Scrum Master, and I currently work as a development manager for a company called SimCorp. That's a company from Denmark, actually. And one interesting thing, perhaps, about me is in the last 36 months, which is also spanning the COVID times, I hired 34 people. So I did a lot of job interviews, which actually told me a lot of things. I heard a lot of interesting questions. Well, to be very honest, I also had a lot of boring interviews, but I heard great questions. I heard some concerns, and that was the idea that brought this presentation to you. I just want to share what I learned with you, and I will not be lecturing, actually. Well, I'm here because I believe that sharing is caring, and I didn't write it there, but I'm also a big fan of this conference. And it's my first time as a speaker at this conference, so thank you so much for your support, and thanks for bearing with me. Thank you. Thank you. Just like the great expectations, I also want to start with talking about why, inspired by Simon Sinek. So you might be hearing from people you meet or from company representatives that we use Jira or version 1. So that shows how agile we are. Or we have daily stand-ups, so we are super agile. Or every team has a Scrum Master or Product Owner or Kanban Master. So this might, of course, give you the impression about the agility level of an organization. Having said that, I also have small kids who taught me about agility in Pokemon. So agility is also important there, but luckily on the cards you can see the scores of agility. So anyone knows this one, this Pokemon here? I see some of you nodding. I think this is the evolved form of Pikachu. Is that correct? Yes, I'm getting the right. Yes. See, the agility level is not very high, right? Okay, but real life is not like that. So you don't have this kind of scorecards. Of course, you can have like maturity tests. Of course, you can have assessments, evaluations, but it's not as clear as it is in Pokemon. So The point here, now we can explore about the questions and then, of course, discover some clues about agility, which would, of course, help us to have a better opinion about the organization. Another thing is, it's not only the job interviews that gave me all these inputs and feedbacks, it's also my personal network. So I, time to time, bump into people who joined the company thinking that it would be great environment in terms of agility, but then get disappointed because the things are not as it looked in the beginning. Of course, you can say that that is also bringing some opportunities for you, but that's another story. So without making you wait, let's start with the 10 questions. In each question slide, you will see a picture of real people, and these are my colleagues in the company I work for. For example, this is Marianne. She's our receptionist, and as you can tell from the smile, super sweet, super kind lady. So the first question, not related to Marianne, of course, is how often does the team receive feedback from customers? First thing is, maybe I'm looking at you. Does this come as a surprise to you when we are talking about agility, the feedback topic? Okay, I see the notes on this way. So this question is about feedback and also customer collaboration. Obviously, I will not be lecturing about the shorter feedback loops and more frequent interactions with the customer, but whatever you will hear from the employer will be telling you something. So for example, you can hear that this position is so far away from the customer. There are like dozens of layers between you and customers. So that's a good clue that in that case, it won't be easy to get feedback. And it would be indirect and not fresh. Another thing is that you can also watch for clues about how the team or how the company works. So for example, for software development companies, if the team is delivering the functionality and that's all, after that the team doesn't hear from the customer if that functionality is being used or how happy or unhappy the customer is about that, it is of course a red flag for you. Right. I move on to the second question, and this is another colleague of mine called Eva. Eva is working with the education services. The question is, how do you motivate people? And I received these questions, and in the first time I received this question, I was really surprised. But it has a lot to do with being agile, actually. Because think about it. We have seen certain professionals that they have all the good intentions, but they motivate people by delivering. Like the more you deliver, the better it is. And of course, that's not the ideal thing. That's not really the same as the value you're adding to the customer. Another thing is, of course, I will not go into the details, but individual bonuses, individual rewards, and certain mechanisms are really not helping with the level of agility. I hope you are writing down your questions and comments so that we will get to there. The third picture is actually the CEO of the company I work for. His name is Christian. And the question is again not related, but it's a funny coincidence. What happens to the employees who make mistakes? And you should really ask this question. It will be telling you a lot. Like, of course, there might be situations where the companies are really learning from mistakes, and really the failures are seen as the first attempts in learning. But there can also be companies that the failures will not be tolerated. It has things to do with psychological safety as well, but it's also very much important about finding the agile employer. Another thing here is that a similar question: what happens to the employees who challenge the status quo? So the point being here is, if there is a negative answer here, like for example, the people who challenge the company are fired, laid off, and the people who make mistakes, they are punished, then of course, then the rest of the people, it's about human psychology. They will try not to do mistakes, and in order to do so, they will try not to take risks, not to make experiments. And about the status quo, so if someone that criticizes things is not tolerated, then people will not criticize. And then you will get to a situation that from outside everything would be great, but from inside things will not be so. Yes, let's move on to the fourth question. And of course, let me introduce my colleagues. And here, unfortunately, I only remember one of them. That's Licia. She's a consultant. And the gentleman, apologies, I forgot the name. But the question is, how do you measure performance? So this is kind of a cliche question, and you might argue that it has nothing to do with assessing the agility of the company, but it does actually. So, for example, velocity. You might still hear things about velocity, things about how you increase velocity, and higher velocity means higher performance. And of course, this is kind of a smell, if you ask me. And on the other side of the picture, so what we mean by the performance. So are we managing the performance, or are we enabling the performance? So enabling the performance is kind of, if you ask me, the nirvana of this thing, but it doesn't come easily. Also, the use of objectives, the use of metrics, these are interesting follow-up questions to this. You can talk about individual performance, and you can talk about team performance, you can talk about company performance, and how all these relate to each other is also an important point to dig into. Another picture. So this gentleman standing is Michel, and he is a trainer in the internal trainings. And the two younger colleagues are software developers, basically. The question is related. How do the senior team members spend their time? So I'm sure you have met senior professionals who would like to optimize their local outcome, local outputs. So who would like to do things themselves because they can do it fast, who would not like to spend time sharing with others or teaching others, because in that time they can deliver valuable features. But the point is, the more senior you are, the more knowledge sharing, mentoring, coaching, training is expected from you. If it's not like that, then we all know what happens. Then you have single person bottlenecks who know everything, but then when they are not available, things go into a stop. You can also remember the Phoenix Project book, which I believe has the character Brent. Anybody remembers Brent here? Yeah, oh, that's great, that's great. Then a more difficult question is coming. Anyone remembers the book, The Goal? Okay, you're great, great audience, thank you. And what was the name of the character similar to Brent in The Goal? Okay, we can talk about it at the break. So back to the question. Obviously, it's not always about software development, but my examples are from software development, so I hope it's okay with you. So perhaps you heard of 10 times engineers who can do 10 times of the work compared to a regular or junior engineer. And that shouldn't be something that we have to be proud of. Perhaps you also heard of the other end of the spectrum. You might be hearing things like, okay, so don't allow the super senior engineers to code. And if you ask me, that is also an extreme response. That's another end of the example. So having a fine balance is always important. Number 6, question 6. So these two gentlemen, so one of them is the Chief Operational Officer and the other one is the Head of Marketing. Names are Johan and Tobias. And the question is, can the team decide their own processes? So I remember the years that empowerment was a buzzword. Maybe it is still a buzzword. Don't really know. But this is how you walk the talk. So as a team or even as an individual, how much you're allowed to decide the processes. And of course, in terms of improving for the greater good. This can be in very much different levels. So in some cases, for example, the team is allowed to move away from Scrum to Kanban. Of course, that's a very tricky example. And in other cases, it could be about product support or correcting bugs and so on. The answer to this question is actually going to tell you about the real empowerment level. Yes, and I have two nice colleagues from our People and Culture department here. And the question is, does the team have time for improvement? So this question can touch a lot of different points, of course. But one thing is, we are all busy to deliver stuff. We all have deadlines. We all have a lot of work to do. And then, of course, you might be remembering the cartoons about it. So when people suggest improvements, you don't have time for it. And then there are some frameworks or there are some well-known companies that had some good practices in terms of securing the time for the individuals and teams to do improvement. And of course, these are good things. As you can see, one more sub-question is coming. Does the team have time for innovation? Now, this is also important because an improvement is not necessarily the same as innovation. While the innovation can be changing a lot for the whole company, it can also be changing a lot for your job satisfaction. So these two questions, obviously you can get answers from, no, we don't have time for this, or we go all the way into that. Another colleague, Emilia, and the question is, how is the team organized? Now, you of course noticed I've been talking about teams, but please, you try to think about it that fits to your own situation. So it can be how is the group organized, how is the department organized, or how is the whole company organized. When you look at the software development team levels, of course, the thing you are asking here is, for example, roles, what kind of roles you have in the team. So for example, one cliche thing is, do you still have distinction between the people who write the code and test the code? Or do you, in other words, do you have silos throwing work to each other? And other than the roles, which of course you can also ask about the more agile roles, other than the roles, the size of the team is telling you something, because as you know, the larger the team is, the more communication channels you have. And then I also first-handedly experienced that the team gets large, there's a lot of work to do, but you see there are people who are idle and unhappy because they can't find work or they can't find opportunity to collaborate with each other. So roles and team size, of course, important thing. Now, obviously, Agile does not equal to Scrum for me, but as it is the popular case, you can also talk about the organization of Scrum Masters. So, for example, does the team have Scrum Master, and how do they work in the team? How do they work in the organization? The same can go to product-related roles as well, like the product owner, and so on. Yeah, and this is Teresa from our marketing department, and the question is, what happens when things go wrong? And, of course, what happens when there's a huge success? Now, this resembles to the question, what happens to the employees who make mistakes? But this is a different point, really. So when the things go wrong, is not necessarily an employee's failure. Like, the market could be down, and the customers could be unhappy about other things. So in general, there are problems. So what do you do? How do you react to them? And of course, this also touches how you look at the problems and how you deal in the difficult times. You can ask about examples on this. And the flip side of the question, if you ask me, is more important. How do you celebrate success? And how do you recognize the good things that the employees do? So you can also ask about the team buildings and the social events and so on. And for me, it's very important to prioritize celebrating success, and you can take it one step ahead, also celebrating learnings from the difficult times. Right, so this is the last question, but this could as well be the first question. How do you define Agile? And of course, what you are looking for here is, does Agile have a bad meaning or bad reputation in this organization? And how does it differ from for example, the people in the team level to the management level? Do they understand the same thing? And of course, try to get some examples about how the company defines Agile. You can also go for what was the reason for you to be Agile. Right, so what I did until now, I gave you the 10 questions right away. I didn't go too much deep in each question, but try to give an appetizer. Now there's an important part, which is your questions, because so far I shared with you things from my context. And now I would like you to tell me what would be your first question to assess the agility level of your prospective employer. You are not obliged to do anything, but if you can join Menti using this number, then we can all have the chance to read what you have questions, like first questions. I'll keep the slide as it is and then move on to Mentimeter. I actually set the Menti to accept only one input. So of course, if you have more than one, maybe you can tell me in the break or you can share in the Q&A session.
But do you want it to be one of the 10 you showed?
No, your own question. What would be your question? Sorry, it wasn't clear, sorry. Any other questions? Then let's look at the mentee. Uh-oh. Could I get a quick help with the internet connection? It's this one, isn't it? Sorry. The password? No, okay, now it works. Thank you. Sorry for taking you here all the way. Yeah. Is it readable? Would you like me to zoom in? Just raise your hand if you like me to zoom in. Yeah? Oh, it doesn't really help much, sorry. No, sorry, maybe you can come closer to it. So what I can do for you is try to read out some of them. Of course, it would be better if you read out your own questions. But let's start. For non-customer facing teams, who are considered the customers? Excellent question. What is the agile maturity of your best, worst team? Why? And of course, here we need to discuss what is the agile maturity, but great point. How quickly are you able to incorporate customer feedback to the release of new products or, I guess, services? Am I right? Yeah. How many meetings does a person in this role attend per week? Could I ask the owner of the question? Yeah. So could you share a little bit more about that? Like how many would be a bad answer?
I would want to know kind of the hours that you spend in meetings versus doing productive work. Not that meetings can't be productive, but most of them.
Exactly, and actually we can derive more questions from here. Like, what's the percentage of time you spend in meetings? How about the meetings where you do actual work or take actual decisions versus the meetings where you feel you don't add anything? Yeah. And what does Agile look like in the organization? What do you want to get out? And I can't read the rest. Maybe the owner of the question can tell. After Agile, yes, perfect. How does the team handle unexpected work? Now I'm learning a lot from you, audience. Thank you so much. It's always nice to tap into the collective intelligence. How do you implement feedback in your sprints? How did you initiate the use of Agile mindset? And actually, one other question could be of course, to the potential employer is, what do you understand from Agile mindset? So let's continue. What is your current level of psychological safety? Yes, indeed. What is the onboarding and training for new team members? That's also excellent. Do you have to wear a mask? I feel really privileged that here I'm not violating, I think, 6 meters room for the presenters, so I could take off my mask. Super point. Question 10, which was how do you define Agile and why they decided to go Agile. Yeah, exactly. Where are you on your path using Agile to develop your software? Yeah. How do you see me at my level working within your team? And I'm really sorry, I have to do like this. And what expectations do you have on me? Yeah, fully agree. We have 5 more, let's go through them. What is the attrition rate within your group, both engineers and product? This tells a lot, doesn't it? About the culture, about the environment. Fully agreed. Does your senior management respect and abide by your Agile team structure? This is actually one of the things I forgot to mention in the presentation. So it's not always about the position that you will be getting and the people you will be working. Of course, it's also about the management, the rest of the company, and also the customers. How long has your organization been Agile? I'm missing one word there, but I hope we understood the question. How is Agile concretely supported by higher management? I think if these were physical post-its or stickies, I was going to group them together, very much similar. And the last question, describe how the organization creates their strategy. Exactly, and then of course how the organization strategy comes down to the team level or the level of the unit that you would be working. So thank you so much for your inputs. Now I learned a lot from you and you made this presentation better because next time I would most likely be including from your inputs as well. Let's go back to the presentation. I have a bonus track for you, and it will be a short one, which is, as I mentioned, I have a life in academia where I was also speaking at conferences, but not like this one, about conferences where you have to talk about something called related work, which is basically what other people did in this area and what are the remarkable things that you need to mention about this topic. So this will not be a very detailed and deep related work, but after coming up with this talk, I did a little search to see how, for example, the people we look up to or call as thought leaders think about this topic. And I found a very short article from Mike Cohn, and the article, you can search for it, is named 3 Questions to Determine if an Organization is Agile. Of course, he was able to do that in 3 questions, not like 10 questions in my case. So I have a short summary of the questions to you. The first question, how frequently do your teams fully integrate their products? Obviously, this is very much, again, software-related question, and Agile is not supposed to be solely used in software, but this is about, as he highlights, assessing the Agile software development team's functionality. And obviously, you would like to hear answers about high frequency of integration or being potentially releasable. The second question from Mike Cohn. How do you respond if there's a crisis or problem that makes a deadline or planned milestone no longer possible to achieve? I was very much surprised that it's very similar to one of the questions I presented, and I didn't come up with the questions. I actually received the questions in the interviews. So Mike is looking at it as gauging leadership commitment to Agile. So as you know, in the good times, it's easy to do the right things. But in the crisis times, there's a risk of falling back to old habits, not necessarily helpful habits. So this question is also looking into what happens when things go wrong, similar to our question. The third question from Mike Cohn is, tell me about your best Scrum Master or product owner. And that's a very interesting question. So maybe you can go back and think how you would answer this question. This also tells something about what do you expect from certain roles. In my career, I heard top managers expecting Scrum Masters to do things which are not really related to the Scrum Master role as it is defined in the Scrum Guide, or the product owner. A good product owner could have a different perception in the people of the organization. So as he says, this is about uncovering hidden Agile dysfunctions. If you search for this article, I really recommend you to scroll down. There's the comment section, and as you can see, there are 65 comments, and out of them, there are also a lot of great questions written by people like us, and very inspiring questions. The second related work I will mention is from this popular website where people share answers to the questions. The question is formulated very nicely. How do I identify during a job interview that the company genuinely has an Agile mindset? Now, I will not go into the answers, but if you're interested, please go ahead and search for it, and you won't be disappointed, I can tell you that. I have been really fast, and I already get to the end. So last but not least, it is, of course, not only the questions, not only the job interviews, there are a lot of other things. So a few of them I want to mention here, is getting a chance to ask these questions. Because if you are sitting at an interview where you are bombarded by the questions, and in the last 2-3 minutes, they tell you, oh, do you also have questions for us? Then it shows that you are not equal on the table. The interview is seen as a one-way street where you have to answer questions, and the potential employer has to ask questions. If you ask me, a better interview is where you ask more questions than the interviewer, and the interviewer has the knowledge to answer your questions genuinely and frankly. The second point is often the person you meet at the interview is not someone from the trenches, or is not someone that walks in the Gemba, which is the production floor from Lean, of course. If you have a chance to have other rounds of interviews, that you will talk to people that do the job that you're looking for, or in the same team, then of course you will have more opportunities to hear from the trenches. Obviously, if the recruiter, hiring manager is not there, that's even better. Then you will have a little bit higher level of psychological safety, and hopefully both the team members and you would be more open about the questions and about the discussions. Now, as I mentioned when we were reading your questions from the Mentimeter, it is, of course, also the rest of the company, including the top management. How do they look at Agile? What do they understand from Agile? What is their definition of Agile? And not only the top management, but also other departments in the organization. So let's say you are product development. It doesn't stop with you. There are other departments that you need to work together with. That could be marketing, that could be product support, that could be customer services, anything. But if you have certain ways of working and the rest are not there, of course it will be giving some clues. And I'm not looking at it utopically, so you don't expect all the departments to be similar as you, but asking about it is a good idea. The second thing, after the comma, clients, that's also important. So if the client is expecting something by a certain time, and it has to be exactly like this, but you still think that you're agile on your side, trying to fulfill the client's wishes, then of course it's raising questions. It's not easy to get there, of course. Also having clients that have a similar understanding, a similar agile mindset. It's not easy to have, well, we do have some clients that are buying user stories or work items from us, not knowing what it is. But this is a good question, good topic to talk about. All right. Let's keep it short and nice. So that was all for me, and I hope you enjoyed that. Now we continue with the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ender. See, am I on? Yeah, thank you, Ender. I've got one question that I'm going to get us started, and if you've got a question, just raise it up, and then either Mark or Sophie will help us collect these and get them up to the front, please. So all these questions are great. And what happens when you're talking to a prospective employer? How do you distinguish between maybe corporate propaganda when they're giving you the answers they want you to hear versus like what's authentically really happening?
That is of course, super good question. So I don't want to give the consultant answer like it depends or there is no silver bullet, but the answer will still be going there. So if you ask yes/no questions, like are you agile or are you running retrospectives? Do you have Scrum Masters? And then you get the right answers, of course, then you will not be able to distinguish. If you ask like product-specific questions, like are you using this certain ADLM system, or are you doing this agile practices? Of course, it will not really give much. My humble suggestion is ask about why they are doing things that they mention as part of corporate propaganda. If they are able to tell you the why of that, then I think it's less of corporate propaganda. But maybe I am missing the point in the question. So am I answering in the right direction? So maybe we can, yeah, okay, I got a thumbs up. Thank you.
Awesome, great. And then how might any of this be different if you're seeking a new role within the company where you already work?
Where you are?
Meaning like you're working in a large organization, so you already work somewhere and you're actually interviewing or seeking a new job within that same company.
Now I got it, yeah. Again, if I understand the question correctly, the assumption here is that the organization is so large that there are differences in the ways of working. Is that the correct assumption? Okay, you see that. I didn't see, but I take your word. Right. Again, how I would approach this situation was to both ask the questions and ask the why questions, but also try to talk to people who are already working there, already in the trenches. Sometimes, of course, the grass looks greener. So if the organization allows, then you can suggest a try before buy approach. Like you can offer some volunteer work or some part-time work with that part of the organization. You can also ask for a short-term assignment, so it's not binding. You can always go back to where you are. And then, of course, the more you talk to people, the better. Is that a good answer, or are there any other parts of the questions that I didn't touch?
No one is saying no.
I interpret that positively.
Yeah. What about sometimes when we're asking employers these questions, we don't get good answers. Like it's really clear their agility or their agility mindset isn't great. And maybe that's okay because you want to go help them. But what's the line of questioning look like when you really want to assess their willingness to change so that might actually embrace greater agile ways of working?
Thank you. That's a very interesting point. So there are a lot of things that I didn't include in the presentation, but one thing I personally favor is the respecting the potential rather than the skills. So believing in the potential, believing in learning and growing. You can relate it to Carol Dweck's growth mindset approach. So, and also you can relate it to continuous learning. And then of course, if they are not open to that, eager to that, not really open for change, not really open for improving or learning, I wouldn't say run away fast, but I would say that you would probably not be happy there. Of course, having said that, I respect that it could be your main motivation. So I want to go to a dysfunctional place and fix it. But of course, there should be some clues. You see that there's hope for changing things.
Thank you. What about, you mentioned this kind of like get in the trenches, like you do a Gemba, walk around, experience it. Maybe the organization you're interviewing with is only familiar with like traditional Q&A style interviewing processes. How might you help influence them or learn, either get that opportunity to do that or ask additional questions that might give you that perspective if you're not able to?
Yeah, thank you. Well, thanks for who asked the question. Obviously, the organization can be traditional with no bad intentions, and perhaps they haven't heard of different ways of doing things. But if you do, then of course it's I see it as it is your responsibility and opportunity to ask them, to suggest them. Like, for example, can I talk to someone from the team? And maybe they didn't think of it. Maybe they thought you wouldn't be interested in that. Or, for example, can I ask you about this? You can start in the beginning. Like, before I answer your questions, can I ask you that? That could be another approach. After hundreds of interviews, I actually have two favorite questions I heard from candidates. I didn't have them here because they don't necessarily relate to being agile, but these are good questions. So one thing is, what is the main challenge here? So ask it at the very beginning, before answering any question. Like, I just want to hear what is the main challenge. If this is not clear, if the hiring manager or recruiter cannot, come up with the one main question, instead lists whatever comes to mind, like 10 things, all of them are main challenges, then of course it tells you something. So we can't even agree on what is the main challenge here. The second question I also favor is, in your eyes, what is the right profile for this role? And this actually takes us to cognitive biases. So we all have our shortcuts in the brain, the cognitive biases. So let's hear, like, what would be the best profile that you were expecting? And maybe it's not the only profile that would be right. So how about this profile? So again, assuming I understood the question correctly, so there is good intention, but the way of doing things are very traditional. You sit down on the other end of the table, I ask you questions, and then I decide. Then, of course, you need to tell them there are better ways to do that. I hope that answers the question. Otherwise, I'm happy to go on.
I'll sort of reframe one part of it really quick. It's kind of like the going beyond the Q&A and how to get to, like, maybe get them to allow you to do a Gemba or actually go in the trenches and experience it so that you don't have to rely on just the Q&A. Any tips for making that happen?
Yeah, that's a tricky question because it also backfires. So, for example, sometimes I try to reveal more from my teams to the candidates. Like, look, this is the real user story that we are working at the moment. Like, how would you approach? And then sometimes the candidates think that, okay, you want me to solve a problem you have before recruiting me. So if you get the consent up front, then of course from the employer side, you can offer these opportunities. But I think you're asking from the candidate side, and that I really don't know. So you can try to suggest, try to ask, like, can I see one real work item in your backlog? Can I see the most recent code you checked in? Can I see the most recent feedback? That kind of things. Of course, you might get the negative answer, but I think it's worth trying. Leslie, was that the point?
I'm not sure whose question that was. Is that helpful? Yes, got a thumbs up back there. Awesome. So your question number 3 around motivating people. You mentioned that compensation may not be helpful sort of in that discussion. Can you elaborate more on that?
Sure. I'm not disregarding compensation. That's the first thing. What I'm talking about is if you have individual bonuses that are tied to certain goals, then what you think is actually you're giving incentive to individuals to prioritize that thing so that they can get the compensation. If you do that, that's okay, but then you're damaging the teamwork. So then you really don't have a team who works for a common goal, but you have a bunch of people who all have their individual goals, and when there's conflict, then of course people would be favoring their goals. And another thing is the compensation. So there's of course the assumption that there is a proper compensation, you're not underpaid, but on top of that wouldn't really motivate most of the intellectual workers. This is not I'm saying, this is Dan Pink was saying 20 years ago.
Awesome, thank you. One of the, it's kind of a comment here, right? It sounds like we're going towards a direction of like something a talent advisor might say that, you know, they're not really interviews, right? Just like one-way question answers, but moving into like discussions, which helps give the candidate sort of a different environment, and understanding it can be sort of like this is a two-way street, not a one-way street. Do you ever find that candidates show up expecting it to be an interview and you're inviting them into this two-way street? Or is there ever been any tension between sort of a discussion style versus more Q&A style interview?
That is a very fair point. Again, my experience comes from software development, and I work in Denmark. I don't really know the situation in here or the countries where you are coming from, but there's a big shortage of professionals in this industry. And even though we are recruiting people from all over the world, we have, I mean, those traditional times are long gone. So often we offer time where we call it coffee talks or virtual coffee talks for talking to people who actually don't have any interest in applying to us. But we just want to tell them what we are doing, what are the challenges we have, what are the opportunities. And then, of course, the classical interviews for certain people that are top of their game. I mean, they are not happy with the classical way, if you ask me, in the software business. At least that's for the geography I'm working with. So they have certain wishes, certain demands that they need to know before they can accept something. Like, for example, how will they use their time and how much they will be independent. And this is, of course, changing the game from the traditional. But I'm not disregarding that the traditional is gone. There are also good things about that, if you are clear with the questions and so on.
Awesome. And there was, on that question, some kudos for the photography and the fact you used real people that you worked with. I thought that was pretty cool.
Thank you so much.
Do you ever use any visualization techniques when you're interviewing people, say like a Kanban board with like the different questions or maybe the outcomes that you want to accomplish throughout the discussion?
Yes, thank you. This is. I mean, I couldn't have told you a better question to ask me. This is really fantastic. In 2019, before the COVID, I attended this conference, and there was a speaker who actually came up with the idea that I hope you all heard of Daniel Kahneman, who had a lifetime of work about these cognitive biases and decision-taking processes. And I hope you heard of speakers who still talk about this. And anyways, in 2019, I attended one session just like this. And there the presenter was simply using a scoring sheet that he was inspired by Daniel Kahneman in his famous book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. So, and that actually inspired me a lot. So the idea here is if you have criteria, like for example, this skill or that experience or even diversity criteria, like the nationality, gender, and even though the scores you are giving to each criteria is very much subjective, it is better than not giving any scores. Like, let's say we have 3 criteria, like you have worked on this programming language, you have worked on this business domain, and then you have been working Agile for this much amount of time. And then let's say you have a simple scoring. It's like 1 to 5. Let's say 5 is the best score, 1 is the worst score. In the end, you can compare all the candidates. You would still be wrong. It will still not be accurate, but it is much, much better than not having these. Because what happens is, after the interview, you have some impression which probably changed over time or which probably is not really accurately representing what you really had in the interview. So therefore, I have been using such technique, but the trick is how to find this criteria. I define these criteria with the teams that I'm recruiting for. If I'm recruiting a software engineer for an Agile team, then I talk with the team about sorry, something is happening with the microphone. Let me speak like that. Then I talk with the team about the team's collective criteria. Sometimes we are voting, sometimes we are agreeing on certain things. And when we do the screening and interviews, we try to score these criteria. And if we have multiple rounds, for example, we always have a second round where I'm not there, but the people in the team talk to the candidate, and they also score, and then we compare our scores. Because I claim that most of the hiring managers can be awfully wrong about their assessments compared to team members' assessments. There's, yeah?
So that was my question, so I have one more question for you.
Sure.
Do you make it transparent and you show the interviewee your board of criteria?
That is a super question. Honestly, we haven't done so.
I mean, that's very risky, but
Yes.
it would be interesting from the perspective of the person being interviewed that they would see, you know, oh, that's pretty cool that they're giving me that assessment, giving the person the opportunity
Yeah, so for those of you, if you couldn't hear, the question is if I'm making this criteria transparent to the candidate, and I said, honestly, I haven't, but I have one answer, which I hope still satisfies some part of it. When I write the job ad, I write the job ad based on those criteria. And the point is how well the candidates are making use of the criteria, because as you know, for example, male candidates have a tendency to apply not really conforming to the most of the criteria compared to female candidates. So even though it's not one-to-one, there's some relation. But thank you so much. That's a good feedback for me. I will try to up my game with that suggestion. Thank you. Yeah. So thanks a lot. I'll be around if you have further questions. I really appreciate your time and bearing with me. I wish you a great experience during the day. Thank you.